Before we're sewing the leather, let's figure out which side is the front and which side is the back. The front side is the one that faces outward, while the back side faces inward. You can tell the difference by looking at the stitch holes. On the front side, the holes are very smooth and neat, and this side is relatively smoother overall. Now, let's look at the back side. The stitch holes are smaller and irregular, and it's not as smooth or shiny as the front side. That's how you can tell the difference between the front and back. Before we start making the item, let's go over 4 small stitching tips. First, we need to figure out the length of thread required for sewing. If the distance to be sewn is less than 30 centimeters, the waxed thread should be 6 times that distance. If it's 30 centimeters or more, then the waxed thread should be 4 times that distance. For detailed steps, you can refer to the video tutorial. Now, let's measure the waxed thread. Since the distance we need to sew is less than 30 centimeters, we'll take a length of waxed thread 6 times that distance. We'll take out the waxed thread and hold one end, placing it on the leather. This is its one-time length. Then extend the waxed thread to 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, until 6 times the original distance. After measuring out 6 times the length, we will cut the waxed thread diagonally, which makes threading the needle easier. Next, I'll explain how to thread the needle. Here we are using double needles for sewing, so both ends need to be threaded. You can see that we need to thread both ends of the waxed thread into needles. First, take out the sewing needles and the measured waxed thread and start threading. Insert the end of the thread into the needle hole and pull it out to match the length of the sewing needle. Next, insert the tip of the sewing needle into one end of the thread. Extending it to twice the length of the sewing needle. Ensuring the needle goes through the loop and stays secure on the thread. Then, hold the short end of the thread and pull it backward to form a loop. Finally, pull the long end tight while securing the short end, completing the threading on one end. The other end is threaded in the same way. Let me demonstrate this once. Hold the end of the thread, pass it through the eye of the sewing needle. Pull it out to some length. Place the thread on the table and use the needle tip to pierce the thread, ensuring the needle is securely through the thread. Pull the short end backward and tighten the long end. Completing the threading. Now, let's start sewing. Take a piece of leather and demonstrate how to sew with double needles. First, pass one needle through the first stitch hole. Then align both needles together. Straighten the threads, ensuring both threads are of equal length. We start by threading the upper needle along with its thread into the second hole. After inserting it, lower the needle and use your other hand's finger to press the thread down. It's worth noting that you can also choose to press upwards. Once you decide on a direction, whether up or down, you need to maintain this throughout the entire sewing process. Changing directions will result in uneven stitching lines. Therefore, if you choose downward, stick with it for consistent, neat lines. Next, we sew from the backside to complete the second hole, then proceed to the third hole. After threading it, pull it out from the other side and continue pressing downwards as before. Then take the other needle and thread it from bottom to top, repeating this process. The direction of the thread must remain constant. If you started going up, keep going up. If you went down, always go down. During sewing, the upper thread should be inserted into the next hole from top to bottom, while the lower thread goes from bottom to top. As we near the end of the sewing, let's show how to finish off the stitching. When done sewing, thread the upper needle back into the previous stitch. This is part of securing the thread. Continue pressing downwards, then thread the lower needle back into the second to last stitch. The upper needle should pass through one more time downward, essentially retracing twice. If at any point the threads cross, use the sewing needle to adjust and keep the two threads parallel. Finally, you'll see that the finished lines are very neat and parallel. Simply cut the thread from the backside, and that completes the finishing touches.